So, you are here. This is a talk which is not going to be about technical stuff. It's about the sense of acknowledging where we are and where we've just been and where we can go. So again, I'd like to thank Hinto for inviting me, and I'd like to thank all the sponsors for ensuring that I could get here and that we could all be together. Right. Let us acknowledge the fundamental weirdness that we are here together, finally. That we are together. And I'd just like to say thank you for being here. It is still strange to be together, to be in a place, to be in a conference. And I just want to sort of see, slides are out. How many in-person conferences have you been to before now? I'll do a countdown. I've been to 5 this year. Has anyone been to about 5 or so? Ooh, 1 person. Hello. Oh, 2. 4. Ooh, a couple more. 3. Getting better. 2. That's a lot. 1. Oh, this is it. Yes, I assumed that was this. Yeah. Yes, it is in fact, this conference is for many people unique. It is the first conference that they've been to in person, in a place, together. And I just want to say I'm glad to be here with you all. Today, there are going to be many, many great talks, and they're going to talk about many subjects, about different things, about possible futures, about new ways of working and new technologies. But I think I want to talk about not merely where do we go next, i.e. all of these futures, all of these possibilities, but also the idea of 3 questions. Where are we now? Where have we just been? And where are we going? So this talk is a bridge. It's a bridge between the last few years, which have been strange, and into the future, via here, now, together. And so it's going to be a talk which uses a bridge metaphor. Obviously, I went and looked for bridges yesterday. One should always localize one's content. This was the best bridge because this is a talk in 3 arches. I'm going to talk about 3 separate parts: the now, the past, and then the future. So, the first arch. Let us begin. Where are we now? And this is, of course, starting with the thing that has not ended. I think one of the things which we need to acknowledge now is that though we are post-lockdown, we are not post-COVID. Things are not finished. We have quite a lot of people, politicians particularly, who want to move on very quickly. And yet, there is a lot of unprocessed emotion. There is a lot of feeling still hanging over us. And so, all I can say for today, here, now, is to be honest and to be kind. Because it's worth recognizing that a lot of people are being brave coming here after the last few years. A lot of people are nervous about what's going on. And a lot of people still have memories of what's happened. And all of these things hang around us. So respect people who feel vulnerable. Do think about how other people are feeling. Feel empathy. Feel a sense of how much being together is about sharing the emotion and sharing care between us. And so that's realistically the first part. I just want to acknowledge the now and acknowledge the vulnerability. So where have we been for the last couple of years? Which is the second arch. This is just a viewpoint. Obviously, how people have experienced the last few years differs and diverges in many, many ways. But I just want to talk about some ideas. So, what just happened? What just happened was sudden trauma. Sudden trauma globally, sudden trauma individually, sudden trauma everywhere. Things were disrupted. Everything changed. Suddenly, everything stopped. In a period of a few weeks, in a period of a few days, suddenly we went from being a hyper-mobile, hyper-connected society in a physical sense to people being in their bedrooms, sitting on their sofas, sitting on their beds. Rapid change, sudden change. Everything changed. The way we worked, the way we related to each other, the way we were friends, the way we worked, all of it. And it kind of needs talking about. In order to be able to get to the future, I think it's worth having a talk now about where we've just been, in order to be able to process it, in order to have some sense of what the hell just happened. So, how do humans cope with sudden change? Humans do cope with human change. Not always. Trauma does her post-traumatic stress disorder. But many, many people can deal with sudden change. Most societies do. So, where have we just been? I need to take a small detour here. I need to take a detour because to some extent, you have no idea what I do or why the hell I should be interested in this. So, what do I do? So, I'm Alastair. I work for Acuity Design. It is basically me. I consult very specifically in the areas of human perception and wayfinding. How do people understand information environments? How do people move through places? This. How do people find their way through places, through information, and how do they understand where they are? How do we prevent people getting lost? And of course, because I'm working mostly in the perception, psychology, sort of neuroscience area of things, it means I work in many different project areas. So, in general, I work in a lot of physical design spaces. So I design maps, museums, wayfinding systems for museums and public buildings. I also design the information architectures of websites. In the last few years, I've worked on augmented reality and virtual reality systems in terms of understanding how people move through extended spaces. And strangely, in the last few years, I've also worked on the idea of how people move and work and understand psychedelic spaces. Psychedelia is very much back in terms of research. Use of drugs, use of alternative ways of inducing psychedelic states. It's back because it's unbelievably successful in curing issues like anxiety, post-stress disorder, addiction. So there is a lot of good work in psychedelia at the moment. And it is, in fact, psychedelic research that I'm going to be using to talk to you today about stuff. Because where there is stuff in psychedelic research which is helpful to the kind of thing that we've just been through, in understanding what the hell just happened. Very specifically, and again, we're in an user experience design thing, I want to talk about the experience of awe. Awe is one of these things which is not talked about a lot nowadays, and yet it's fundamental, and it's hugely important. And it was something that, historically, people used to go and look for awe. It was like a dangerous sport. People would actually go to places to induce the sense of awe, to see what the hell happened. They would go to Switzerland. They would go to Italy. They would go to Italy to see the art, because the art was so awesome. But awe is incredibly strange. But of course, nowadays, people just think about shock and awe. The Gulf War, there was a lot of discussion of shock and awe, the idea of being the sudden shock and the overwhelming sense of awe. It's not awfully helpful. I mean, obviously you have shock, but shock is a fairly momentary thing. Shock is a fairly sudden, not deeply felt, but deeply sudden experience. While awe is much deeper and lasts much longer, and is something that you experience from when you're a small child. So, awe, fundamentally, is extraordinary. It's an experience which is beyond something you have experienced before. And in that, it's also overwhelming. The sense of awe is overwhelming you emotionally, physically, in all these ways. And there's a danger in it. And as I say, when people used to tour Europe in the 19th century, when they used to go to look at the mountains in Switzerland and the art in Rome or Florence, there was actually warnings. The tourists were warned that they might be traumatized, that this thing, experiencing the art, experiencing the mountains, might traumatize them. Awe can be painful. Awe can be overwhelming. But I need to talk about how awe works. And there is research in how these things work. Because of the psychedelic research and because of quite a lot of what was known as psychedelic guide work in America during the 70s and 80s, there is actually a relatively good understanding of how awe and the experience awe works and how it connects to the experiences that many of us have just been through. So, 6 parts. How do we talk about awe? How do we talk about the experiences that we've been through? So, number 1, physical sensations. When you feel awe, when you are in an experience of awe, you will feel weird. To be perfectly honest, in the last few years, if you weren't feeling weird, I would say there was something slightly strange going on. The last few years, between actual COVID and any of the sense of the illness of being trapped at home, trapped in other things, the physical sensations will be there. We would all feel weird in the last few years, and we all did. So that's number 1. The second one is slightly weirder. The second one, when you feel awe, you suddenly have, and this is the long word, self-diminishment. What that means in real terms is you suddenly feel small. When you face something which is overwhelming and awesome, you suddenly feel very small as a person. You suddenly feel the enormity of things. In general, the experience of awe that most people remember is their primary one, which is when they arrive at the school for the first day of school in their life, and just how big the school gates are, how big the school is. Partially, that's because you were small. Partially, that's because you were feeling awe. You're coming to a new place. You're coming to something which has been built up as a thing of an extraordinary power. So you will and you did feel that sense of the enormity of the school gates. The way in which teachers appeared much taller than your parents. You were used to your parents. Teachers, bigger. And that's the sense of feeling small when you feel awe. And that sense of suddenly feeling small did occur during the last couple of years. I have to be honest, it didn't occur in the way that I was expecting. But of course, everyone became very small in the last couple of years because everyone was in tiny rectangles. So many, many small rectangles. Everyone became small. And everyone felt small because they knew that they were yourself, being projected in a very small way on another screen, far away, smaller and smaller. That sense of shrinking in, sitting in your bedroom, sitting in your kitchen, sitting in your living room, feeling small. So as you move through the experience of awe, you're feeling strange, you're feeling small. And then suddenly you realize that the world has changed. Everything that you were used to has gone. And so you have a sense of what's known as perceived vastness. Everything appears vast, huge around you. Not merely because you're feeling smaller, but because suddenly all the boundaries that you're used to, all the ways in which you understood things have disappeared. So within a few days, you've gone from knowing how your life works. You go from your home, you commute, you go to work, you go for drinks afterwards, you commute, you're back at home. You have a sense of how things work in both place and time. You have boundaries. Boundaries are hugely important to humans. You understand stuff by having boundaries. And suddenly, you're sitting on your sofa. All of the temporal boundaries are gone. All the physical boundaries have gone. Suddenly, you're just there. And the office arrives on your computer. And then the office arrives in those many, many little rectangles. And then the office just keeps arriving because nobody knew how to control when the hell you were at work, what the hell work meant. And so just work all the time, everywhere. And that was the vastness. Suddenly you were connecting to people in many different countries, which is good, but also strange in terms of suddenly going beyond your office to this connection to many, many places. And this lack of boundaries means that you can't place yourself in a place. People who are lost find it very difficult to know what they're doing because they can't tell where they are relative to the space they're in. And so it's everything here, all around you, but in a swirl, in a terrible, terrible, strange mess. So the space becomes vast and difficult for you. But the other effect is time distorts. Time goes very weird with awe. Awe can accelerate and decelerate time because you've got none of the standard ways in which you can understand what's going on. You've got none of the standard methods of being able to measure the experience. So, I mean, certainly for my family and for the people I work with, the last couple of years have just been a blur. We don't actually have any meaningful sense of when the hell anything happened in the last few years. Stuff happened, but whether it was winter or spring or summer, whether it was when in a week, we lost complete contact with the meaning of time because we never went anywhere. And we never did anything in very, very meaningful patterns. So everything became a smear. And so the last few years have been this blur where you ask people about stuff and it's just like, well, sometime. So people had no idea where they were, apart from they were sitting in their kitchen table. And they had no idea when things were, because time has gone weird. So what this means is, globally, everyone felt lost for the last few years. Very, very lost. And that continued for quite a while. The sense of being in a place with no boundaries, no real sense of time, no real understanding of what the hell's going on. And it passed, and it passed. But of course, awe is doing something. Awe is a way in which we actually learn. Awe changes. So we've been through these 4 parts. But there is a part where awe begins to connect things together. Awe begins to suddenly, within this blankness, within this time blur, begins to see connections. You begin to understand stuff. You began to understand how the online tools worked. Zoom, Teams, all of these things. You did begin to understand that you should mute your microphone. These things began to be things you understood. You began to understand new workflows. You understood how Mural and Miro and all these other new tools which suddenly appeared began to work and connect things together. And of course, hybrid came out of all of this, suddenly beginning to understand that there were ways of working between fully remote and fully in person, that there were ways that we hadn't really approached to do these things. And this gets to the final part of awe. The final part of awe is what's known as accommodation. Accommodation is the idea that people get used to change. People begin to, once they've connected stuff together, once they've understood how things mesh, once they begin to see where the boundaries are, once they begin to have a sense of time, they get used to what's happening. You get used to being just in your bedroom, sitting on the bed, doing Zoom calls. You get used to these ideas. And so people get used to change. Which is good and bad. Returning more to a sort of design sense of things, I just need to talk about how accommodation is like the mirror image of affordance. Now, in design terms, most people understand what affordance is. So, affordance in general design terms is obvious usability. I can see how to use the thing because it's obvious. The push plate on a door with the sign, push. You understand the meaning of it. That is affordance. It is clear, it is obvious, it is usable. Accommodation isn't. Accommodation can quite often be from the world of meh. It's bad, but I get used to it. Huge amounts of the world is like that. We get used to the fact that things don't quite work. We get used to the fact that things aren't quite designed well enough. And we just use them. So accommodation, this sort of ability to be able to take in both the extraordinary and the mundane, is important to us. But where I am at the moment, and what I'm mostly concerned about, is where do we go from here? The final arch. Because the danger now is that we allow the bad, that accommodation of badness stuff, to stay, and we forget the good. And because work has changed, it's changed quite radically. And the idea that we have a greater choice of ways of working, the hybrid, all of these things, is important. And we should remember this, and we should not let it go. So where do we go next? I mean, the bad version is that we just go back to everything we've just been doing previously, the old patterns. Just go back to the damn office. Just do the things we used to. But we know, statistically, only 6% of people want to go back to the office like that. Most people want hybrid. Most people want some form of hybrid or remote or something. Going back isn't a good idea, and yet the way that some people talk, they would like us just to do what we did before and just forget the last couple of years. And I think that's dangerous. So a better path is actually in remembering what we've just been through and keeping what was better. Because I think there were things which were worth keeping. I mean, from my personal aspect of running workshops, running co-design, running all of these sort of design sessions, I would say that one of the things which was really important is just how important being explicit about emotions and about the way that we feel and the way that we talk. Because 50% of online communication is misunderstood. Because it's not clear what the hell the person meant. It's not clear whether they had strong feelings or not. So being explicit really helps. So say it, say things. But of course, also being explicit about what is work, what is home, where are you? That's the last couple of years, we've had that confusion. And only now are some companies really properly understanding that we need to make sure there is an explicit distinction between places. You know, Miro, I was listening to their design ops manager last week, talking about office hours. They are very clear that people need to know when they are in the office so that they know when they're actually supposed to be working, but also so that they know when their manager is in work. Because a lot of the problems they had was nobody knew where their managers were, and therefore decision processes collapsed. Decision systems collapse when you're just not sure where your manager is or what time they're doing or what. And so there's that matching together of office hours, both of staff and managers, to enable companies to actually do the work. And finally, within all of this, there is that sense that a lot of what's happened was allowed us to be more inclusive. And with that, it would also be worth being more kind. So show it. Be explicit about the way in which work and the work format and the way in which work is managed is done. It helps. So the better path is always going to be by being clear and explicit. And I think those are things which is worth keeping. So, where are we? Where have we been? And where do we go next? The three arches. That was just all that talk was about. So, I started with the things that haven't ended. COVID isn't over. People still feel vulnerable. We should recognize and acknowledge that. And I would just like to end with the things that are just starting. We're together. This is the first speech. There are many, many speeches after me. Listen to them and be happy that we can. But don't forget the past. Remember that people feel vulnerable. Be kind. And then I think the value of today, and the best value of today, is you have the opportunity to listen, talk, and imagine so many hopeful futures. So, have a good day, here and now, and wherever you choose to go next. Thank you.